Part 1. The Boy with the Broken Watch. I want to start by telling you about a watch. It was old, scratched, the kind of watch you'd find at the bottom of a box at a garage sale, the kind that no one wants because the glass is cracked and the leather strap is worn down to almost nothing. He wore it every single day. On our first date, I noticed it and thought, okay, this guy doesn't care about appearances. I liked that. I thought it meant he was real. I didn't know then what I know now. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was 26 when we met, and I was 24. We were both at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. He was sitting across from me, working on a laptop, and he kept sighing these heavy, frustrated sighs that were honestly kind of annoying. I finally looked up from my own work and said, "Whatever it is, it can't be that bad." He looked at me, and he smiled. And that was it. That was how it started. He told me he was a freelance consultant. He worked for small businesses, helped them with strategy, got paid project by project. It explained why he was always around during the day, always free for last-minute dinners, always able to drop everything and drive 2 hours with me to see a concert. He wasn't tied to an office. He wasn't tied to a schedule. He was, I thought, beautifully free. He rented a one-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes from mine. It was modest, clean, but modest. IKEA furniture, a half-dead plant on the windowsill that he kept insisting he was going to water more, a second-hand couch that was so comfortable I never wanted to leave. I spent more and more nights there as the months went on. We had been together for almost a year before I noticed the first thing. It was a Saturday afternoon in September. I was looking for scissors in his kitchen drawer, the one he kept miscellaneous junk in. Every apartment has one. And underneath a takeout menu and a dead battery and 3 random pens, I found a business card. It wasn't his name on the card. It was a company name, Mercer Capital Group. And below that, a title, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. I picked it up and stared at it for a long moment. Then I told myself it was probably just something from a client. Maybe a card a client had given him. Maybe it had ended up in his drawer by accident. I put it back and didn't think about it again. I wish I had thought about it more. The thing about Daniel was that he was so genuinely, effortlessly warm that you just never questioned him. He remembered everything you told him. If I mentioned in passing that I was stressed about a work deadline, he'd text me the morning of that deadline with a voice note, just talking, casual, something funny that had happened on his morning run, and it would make the whole day easier. He sent flowers to my mom on her birthday after I mentioned it once, weeks earlier. He watched bad television with me without complaint and made genuinely good popcorn, and never, not once, made me feel like my concerns were too small or my emotions too big. He was the best person I had ever dated, and he was lying to me every single day. Part 2. The cracks. The second thing I noticed was the car. Daniel drove a very average sedan, a dark gray Honda. It had a slight dent on the rear bumper. He drove it everywhere. Then one Wednesday in November, he picked me up from work and the car was different. It was a black SUV, the kind with tinted windows, the kind where the leather seats feel like they were designed by someone who actually cared. I assumed he'd borrowed it or rented it or something. I didn't ask directly because it felt weird to make a big deal out of it. But I noticed. The third thing I noticed was a phone call. We were at a restaurant. Nothing fancy, a Thai place we both loved. And his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his face, just for a second. It was gone so quickly that if I hadn't been looking right at him, I would have missed it entirely. He excused himself from the table and went outside. He was gone for 11 minutes. I counted, not because I'm paranoid, but because the food arrived and I was trying to decide whether to start without him. When he came back, he sat down, picked up his chopsticks, and said, "Sorry, client emergency." And that was it. I asked if everything was okay. He said yes. He changed the subject. A week later, I Googled the company name from the business card, Mercer Capital Group. I don't know why I waited so long. Maybe I didn't really want to know. Maybe I was protecting something I was afraid to lose. But I typed it into Google on a Tuesday night when I couldn't sleep, and I sat there in my bed with my laptop, and the first result was a Forbes article. I clicked on it, and there he was. The headline was from 18 months earlier. It read, Daniel Mercer, the 25-year-old who quietly built a $4.2 billion real estate empire. I read the article 3 times. The photo was him. Same eyes, same smile, same jawline. But in the photo, he was wearing a suit that cost more than my rent. He was standing in front of a building that, according to the caption, he owned outright. The article talked about how he had inherited a real estate company from his grandfather at 19, had quietly and aggressively expanded it over 6 years, had made a series of acquisitions that no one saw coming, and had emerged as one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. It mentioned, near the end of the article, that he was notoriously private about his personal life. I put my laptop down. I looked at my ceiling for a very long time. Then I picked my phone up and texted him. "Hey, are you awake?" He responded in 30 seconds. "Yeah, can't sleep either. Want me to come over?" I said no. I said I was fine. I put my phone face down on the mattress and lay there in the dark until the sun came up. Part 3. The conversation I rehearsed 100 times. I didn't confront him right away. I want you to understand that. I know some people would have called him the next morning, demanded an explanation, maybe thrown something. I'm not that person. I'm the kind of person who needs to think, who needs to sit with something until I understand how I feel about it before I can talk about it out loud. What I felt was complicated. On one level, he hadn't technically lied. He'd never said he was broke. He'd never said he didn't have money. He'd described himself as a consultant, which was technically true in the sense that he did advise businesses, his own, presumably, and maybe others. He'd just omitted enormously, planetarily. On another level, I felt like a complete fool. All those times I had insisted on splitting the bill because I didn't want to feel like he was taking care of me. All those times he had let me. Had he found that funny? Had he thought it was cute, watching me count out exact change while he sat there worth $4 billion? Had he told his friends about me? His girlfriend who made him split tapas at that little place on 5th Street because she was very serious about not being dependent on anyone? I felt the heat of that embarrassment in my face even as I was sitting alone in my apartment. And then there was the other thing, the thing I kept pushing away, but that kept crawling back. If he had hidden this, something this enormous, what else was he hiding? I waited 2 weeks, 2 weeks of normal. Dinners, phone calls, a Sunday where we drove out to the coast and sat on the rocks and talked about nothing important. He was exactly the same as he had always been, warm, attentive, present, the Daniel I had fallen in love with. I kept waiting for something to feel different. It didn't. And that somehow was the most unsettling part. On a Friday evening, we were at his apartment. He was making dinner. He was a genuinely good cook, another thing I'd loved about him. And I was sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of wine, watching him, and I thought, now. I said, I Googled Mercer Capital Group. He went still. He didn't turn around right away. He stood at the stove with his back to me, and I watched his shoulders do something. Tighten, I think, and then deliberately relax. Then he turned the burner down, set the spoon down on the rest, and turned around. He leaned back against the counter and looked at me. His expression was careful. Not guilty, exactly, more like someone who had been waiting a long time for a particular door to open and was now standing in front of it, hand on the knob, not quite sure what they'd find on the other side. "Okay," he said. "Just that. Okay." $4.2 billion, I said. That's what the Forbes article said. He nodded slowly. That was 18 months ago. It's probably a bit more than that now. I stared at him. You're telling me it's more? I'm not saying that to be impressive. I'm saying it because you cited the number and I wanted to be accurate. Daniel, I know. You let me split the check with you. You wanted to. I wanted to because I thought we were equals, and something moved across his face. You are my equal, he said quietly. You always have been. The money has nothing to do with that. That's not your decision to make, I said. You took that choice away from me. You decided for me what I would be comfortable with, what I could handle, what I should know about the person I was in a relationship with. That's not okay. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. I know you're right. Then why? I asked. Why didn't you tell me? And that was when he told me the real story. Part 4, what he told me. He poured us both more wine. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table and he told me everything. He had started telling women early on. Women he dated, women he was interested in. He'd been raised by his grandfather, who was blunt and practical and had told him once, when Daniel was about 20, son, when people know you have money, they stop seeing you. He hadn't really understood what that meant until he did. The first serious relationship he'd had after the company became publicly successful. He'd been 22, had started and ended inside of 6 months. She had been perfectly nice. He had no bad things to say about her, but he had watched, with a kind of sad clarity, the way she began to see the life she could have instead of the person in front of her. The vacations she mentioned more and more, the apartment she thought they should upgrade to, the friends she started introducing him to, one by one, as if she were laying groundwork for something. It wasn't malicious, he knew that. She wasn't a bad person, but it had still broken something in him. After that, he had started keeping it quiet. Not lying exactly, omitting, living small when he didn't have to, driving regular cars, wearing old clothes, renting average apartments. Not because he wanted to be dishonest, he said, but because he wanted to find someone who saw him, who chose him, before they ever knew about the rest of it. And you, he said, looking at me across the table, are the first person in a very long time who I've actually wanted to tell. But you still didn't, I said. I was scared, he said, which I know is not a good enough reason. It's not, I said. I know. We sat with that for a while. The food was going cold on the stove. Neither of us moved to get it. Is there anything else? I asked finally. He looked at me for a long moment. What do you mean? He said. I mean, is the money the only thing, or is there more? And the way he hesitated, just a fraction of a second, just the smallest possible pause, was enough. Part 5. The other thing. There's something else, he said. I put my wine glass down. He looked at the table. He looked up. He looked like a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had finally run out of the strength to keep it off the ground. About 8 months before I met you, he said. I was engaged. The word landed in the room like something physical. Her name was Claire, he said. We were together for 2 years. I told her everything, the company, the money, all of it, from the start. It was the opposite of how I did things with you, and I thought it would be better. I thought transparency would protect me. He paused. His hands were flat on the table. Still. She was also working for one of my competitors, he said. I found out 3 weeks before our wedding. She had access to my personal files, things I'd shared with her in confidence, projections, acquisition targets, private communication between me and my lawyers. She passed all of it along. The engagement was real. Her feelings, I think, were real. But she'd been recruited before we even met, and she'd accepted. I didn't say anything. The competitor used it to block 2 deals I'd been building for years, he said. Cost me a lot. Not just money, a lot of trust, a lot of, I don't know, it changed how I see things. Why didn't you tell me this? I asked. Because I didn't want you to see me as someone who was damaged, he said. And because I didn't want you to think that hiding the money from you was about distrust of you specifically. It wasn't. It was just damage, I said. Yeah, he said quietly. Damage. I looked at him. I thought about the broken watch. I thought about the first day in the coffee shop and his frustrated sighs and the half-dead plant and every meal we'd ever eaten together, every night I'd fallen asleep on his secondhand couch. I thought about 11 months of feeling completely seen by someone who was simultaneously hiding from me. I thought about how love is always a risk and how we're all, every single one of us, hiding something. I need time, I said. He nodded. I know. Not forever, just time. Whatever you need, he said. I'll be here. Part 6, what I did with the time. I gave myself a month. I threw myself into work, spent a lot of evenings with my best friend Kara, who knew pieces of the story and listened carefully without telling me what to do, which is the best thing a friend can offer when you're figuring something out. I went on a solo trip to a city I'd never been to and walked around for 2 days with no agenda, eating at counters and sitting in parks and letting my brain slow down. I thought about trust, about what it means, really, at its core, because we tend to talk about trust like it's a binary thing. You either have it or you don't. You're either honest or you're a liar. But I've come to think it's more like a fabric, complex, woven from 1,000 small choices. And it can fray without breaking, and it can be repaired, and the repaired places are often stronger than the original, though they're never identical. Daniel had frayed the fabric. The question was whether the damage was in the structure, whether he was fundamentally the kind of person I couldn't be with, or whether it was in the surface, whether what he'd done came from fear and old wounds or from something darker. I thought about Claire. I thought about what it would do to a person, that kind of betrayal, to have chosen someone, built something with them, been ready to spend a life with them, and then discover it was, at least partially, an operation. I thought about how long it would take to trust again after that, if you ever fully did. I thought about the watch. I had asked him about it once, early on. He'd smiled and said it had been his grandfather's, that his grandfather had worn it every day until he couldn't anymore and had given it to Daniel before he died, and that Daniel wore it because it made him feel like he wasn't alone. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. It was a sweet story. Lots of people have sentimental objects, but now I thought about it differently. Here was a man with more money than most people would see in 100 lifetimes, and the thing he chose to wear every day was a cracked, scratched, falling apart old watch because it reminded him of someone who had loved him before any of the rest of it existed. Before the empire and the articles and the $4 billion and the betrayal and the careful, deliberate smallness of his ordinary apartment. Before any of that, there had just been a grandfather and a boy and a watch. On the last day of the month, I texted him. I said, "Can we talk?" He said, "Yes, when?" I said, "Tonight. Part 7, tonight." We met at the coffee shop where we'd first spoken. His idea. I thought that was either very romantic or very manipulative. And then I decided it didn't matter which because I had made my decision before I walked in the door. He was already there when I arrived. He was at the same table. I don't know if that was intentional or coincidence. He was wearing the watch. I sat down across from him. "I've been thinking," I said. "I figured," he said. "I've been thinking about why what you did hurt," I said. "And I've been trying to separate out what parts of that were actually about you and what parts were about me." He was quiet, listening. "There's a part of me," I said, "that was hurt because I found out from Google instead of from you. That's real, and that's not going away quickly. And there's a part of me that was embarrassed because I thought I was perceptive and I missed something enormous. And that's more about my ego than about you, so I'm trying not to hold you accountable for it." He almost smiled. Almost. "And there's a part of me," I said, "that was afraid that everything I felt was built on a lie. That the Daniel I knew was a character you were playing and not who you actually were." "And?" he said. "And I don't think that's true," I said. "I think the Daniel I knew is exactly who you are. I think the money is real and the fear is real and the damage from Claire is real. And I think you were trying to protect yourself. And I think the way you did it was wrong. And I think you know that." "I do," he said. "So here's what I need," I said. "I need honesty to be the rule, not the exception, about everything, even the things you think I can't handle, or the things you think are better left unsaid. I need to be treated as someone who can make informed decisions about her own life." "That's fair," he said immediately. "And I need you to understand," I said, "that I'm not with you because of the money. I need you to actually believe that and not spend the rest of our relationship waiting for me to reveal that I'm the second coming of Claire." His jaw tightened slightly. Yeah, I hear you. Can you do that?" He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "I can try. I think trying honestly is the best I can offer anyone. But I will try." I nodded. We sat there. Then he said, "Does this mean—" "Yes," I said. "It means yes." He exhaled, like he'd been holding it for a month. We ordered coffee. We stayed until they started stacking chairs. We talked, really talked, for the first time without anything between us, without any carefully maintained smallness or strategic omission. He told me about the company, actually told me, and it was fascinating and strange and occasionally alarming in scale. I told him about my month, about the solo trip, about what I'd been working through. At some point, I looked down at his wrist and said, "You should get that fixed, the glass." He looked at it. "I've thought about it," he said. "I never do." "Why not?" He was quiet for a second. "I think I'm used to it broken," he said. "I think maybe that's how I know it's real." I looked at him for a moment. "You're going to have to work on that," I said. He smiled. "I know. Epilogue. What I know now." It's been a year and a half since that conversation. Things are different now and also strangely the same. We moved in together, into a place that is, I will admit, significantly nicer than either of our previous apartments, though I drew a hard line at anything that required its own name or a staff. He travels for work sometimes, and when he does, he calls. Every night without fail, even if it's just for 10 minutes. He introduces me to the people in his real life, the actual world he lives in, and I'm still occasionally startled by the scale of it. There was a dinner once with people whose names I had seen in headlines, and I sat there very calmly and thought, this is my life now, and then had a very long conversation with Kara about it the next morning. But here's the thing I want to tell you. The thing I actually want you to take from this story. He still has the broken watch. I stopped pushing him to fix it because I started to understand it differently. There's something that I think a lot of us carry. Some broken thing we hold on to because it's the truest version of ourselves. The version that exists before the success, before the image, before the life we've carefully built around us. Daniel's watch is his, the grandfather who loved him before he was anything. The time when he was just a person, unprotected, unimpressive, holding a cracked piece of glass on a fraying leather strap. I think maybe we all have something like that. Something we keep damaged on purpose. The question is whether we're brave enough to show it to someone. He was, eventually. And I think that was the most honest thing he ever gave me. But here's the part I haven't told you yet. 2 months ago, I was going through some old boxes in the back of our closet, looking for a book I couldn't find anywhere else. And in one of the boxes, his, from before we moved in together, I found a folder, just a plain manila folder, the kind you'd use for taxes or receipts. Inside it were photographs, not of Claire, not of some other woman, of me, from before we met. There I was at the coffee shop, at the table I always sat at on Tuesday mornings, and at the park 3 blocks from my old apartment, and outside the building where I worked. They weren't threatening photographs. They didn't look like surveillance. They looked like someone who had been watching me, carefully, quietly, over a period of what looked like weeks, before walking into that coffee shop and sitting down across from me and sighing in a way that was apparently designed to get my attention. I put the folder back in the box. I closed the box. I stood there in the closet for a long time, and I thought about the first thing I ever said to him. Whatever it is, it can't be that bad. I thought about how he had smiled. I thought about the watch. I thought about how well I knew him and how well I thought I knew him, and the space between those two things, and whether that space was dangerous or just human. I still don't know what to do with what I found. I'm still thinking. If you want to know what I decided, leave a comment. Maybe I'll make a part 2.